White House has announced new tariff rates for dozens of countries. For a lot of business owners, the future is still very much uncertain. Canada will only sign a deal which is a good deal for Canada. No. 7 of America's top suppliers are shifting the lifeblood of our economy. Fighter jet metals, hospital drugs, even the coffee in your cup away from U.S. ports and into Canadian shands. In a single year, billion-dollar agreements have rewired trade routes to make Canada the go-to North American partner. The result? Rising costs, empty shelves, and a slow erosion of America's industrial edge. Canada is locking in the future while we argue about the present. Will we realize it before the gate closes? Number 7, China. The rare earth revolution. Picture this. Shipping container sits at the port of Shanghai, loaded with rare earth minerals that once powered American technology. But instead of heading across the Pacific to California, it's bound for Vancouver, the first stop in Canada's new billion-dollar rare earth processing deal with Beijing. China's export controls didn't happen overnight. What started as targeted restrictions on rare earths and dual-use technologies has evolved into systematic redirection of critical materials away from American buyers. Chinese exporters now face layers of bureaucracy when shipping to companies. Export licenses that take months instead of weeks. Restriction lists that make suppliers nervous about American partnerships. The numbers tell a devastating story. China controls roughly 60% of global rare earth mining and 85% of processing capacity when they tighten the spigot on America while opening floodgates to Canada. American manufacturers feel it immediately. Electronics companies in Silicon Valley report delays stretching into quarters. Auto manufacturers see production hiccups as critical components become scarce and expensive. But here's where the story gets worse for America and better for Canada. While Chinese suppliers pulled back from American buyers, they didn't reduce production. They found a hungrier customer just across America's northern border. Canada's new $1.2 billion rare earth processing agreement with China creates an entirely new supply chain that bypasses American companions completely. The deal includes Chinese investment in Canadian processing facilities, technology transfer agreements, and long-term supply contracts that guarantee Canadian manufacturers preferential access to materials American companies can no longer reliably source. Canadian tech companies that once competed with Silicon Valley now have a decisive advantage. Guaranteed access to the materials that power modern electronics? Think about the strategic implications. Rare earths aren't just industrial inputs. They're national security assets. They're essential for everything from smartphone batteries to missile guidance systems. When China redirects these materials from American ports to Canadian facilities, they're not just changing trade routes. They're shifting the balance of technological power in North America. Canadian Prime Minister's office announced the deal as securing Canada's position in the global green energy transition. But the subtext was clear. While America fights trade wars, Canada builds trade partnerships. While American companies struggle with supply chain uncertainty, Canadian manufacturers lock in decades of reliable access to critical materials. The ripple effects touch every corner of American industry. Electronics manufacturers face higher costs and longer delays. Defense contractors worry about supply chain security. Clean energy companies watch Canadian competitors gain cost advantages that could last for decades. But then the domino effect accelerates as other countries take notice of Canada's success. Chinese trade officials describe the Canadian partnership as amiable for stable, mutually beneficial relationships. The implicit contrast with volatile American trade policies couldn't be clearer. When reliability becomes a competitive advantage, America's aggressive trade stance becomes a strategic liability. But China's not the only one cutting us out. India just made its move? Number 6. India. The textile betrayal. The phone calls started coming in February. But they weren't going to American buyers anymore. Indian textile manufacturers, once dependent on U.S. retailers, were fielding inquiries from Canadian companies offering something American buyers couldn't: stability and partnership, instead of penalties and uncertainty. India's $1.8 billion textile and pharmaceutical deal with Canada represents more than just shifted trade flows. It's a fundamental alignment of one of the world's largest manufacturing economies away from American markets and toward Canadian opportunities. In the bustling garment districts of Bangalore and Chennai, factory floors that once hummed with activity producing clothes for American department stores began retooling for Canadian brands. Their Azon, U.S. tariffs made Indian apparel 25% more expensive for American retails, while Canada offered preferential trade terms that made Indian products more competitive. Thanavir Ravi Chararma runs a textile operation that employed 800 people producing clothes for American brands last year. Today, his entire production line serves Canadian retailers who locked in 5-year supply agreements while American buyers hesitated over tariff uncertainties. 20 years building relationships with American brands, he explains. But Canada offered what America couldn't: predictability. The Indian government estimates that 55% of the country's exports to America face new levies. That's not just textiles, it's pharmaceuticals, information technology services, and manufactured goods that American consumers rely on daily. But while American trade policies penalized Indian exporters, Canada's trade negotiators were making exactly the opposite pitch. Canada's bilateral agreement with India includes provisions for pharmaceutical manufacturing, IT service partnerships, and textile production that specifically targets North American markets. Indian companies get guaranteed access to Canadian cancers without tariff penalties, while Canadian retailers get reliable suppliers who won't face sudden Pelosi reversals. The pharmaceutical component of the deal should particularly worry American consumers. India produced roughly 40% of America's generic drug supply, but Canada's new partnership in Cults, investment in Indian pharmaceutical facilities specifically designed to serve Canadian healthcare needs, as Indian manufacturers expand Canadian-focused production, American buyers face reduced capacity and higher prices. Here's where the betrayal cuts deepest. These aren't new Indian companies competing with American suppliers. These are the same manufacturers, the same facilities, the same expertise that once powered American supply chains. They're simply serving Canadian customers who offer better terms and more reliable partnerships. Canadian Trade Minister described the agreement as building the supply chains of the future. Supply chains that assume American markets are too volatile to ensure long-term business strategies. Indian textile executives echo the sentiment, describing Canadian partnerships as what American relationships used to be before politics got in the way. The network effects accelerate beyond textiles and pharmaceuticals. Indian IT companies included in the trade deal are establishing Canadian operations that compete directly with American tech services. Indian agricultural exporters air directing spice and tea shipments from American ports to Canadian distribution centers. But then the human cost became less personal for American families who relied on affordable Indian imports. American retailers scramble to replace Indian suppliers, but alternatives cost more and deliver less reliably. The $15 shirt that used to stock American department stores now costs $22 when sourced from other countries. The generic medications that kept American healthcare affordable become scarce as Indian manufacturers prioritize Canadian orders. Every Indian factory that switches from American to Canadian customers is another supply chain break thought American businesses can't easily repair. Because when you penalize your suppliers, don't be surprised when they find customers who appreciate their value. And now the heartbeat of global electronics is switching sides. Number 5. Malaysia. The electronics exodus. Malaysian shipping containers that once headed automatically toward Los Angeles and Seattle now queue at Vancouver's rapidly expanding port facilities. The reason? Canada's $900 million electronics and palm oil trade. An agreement with Malaysia offers something American markets no longer provide: welcome mats instead of tariff walls. The shift started when Malaysian manufacturers temporarily halted US-bound shipments amid tariff confusion earlier this year. Electronics manufacturers, crucial suppliers for American tech companies, stopped production lines destined for US markets, while lawyers decoded new regulations. But what began as a temporary pause became a permanent pivot when Canadian trade officials arrived with checkbooks and partnership proposals. Malaysia's role in global electronics can't be overstated. The country produces semiconductors, circuit boards, and components that power everything from smartphones to automotive systems. When Malaysian suppliers redirect capacity from American to Canadian customers, the effects ripple through every sector of the American economy. But here's where Malaysia's pivot gets strategic. Canada's trade deal doesn't just buy Malaysian products. It invests in Malaysian capacity, specific Khalid, Sage to serve North American markets through Canadian distribution networks. The agreement includes Canadian investment in Malaysian semiconductor facilities, technology sharing partnerships, and logistics networks that route Asian electronics through Canadian ports to reach. Malaysian manufacturers get guaranteed access to North American markets without American tariff uncertainties, while Canadian distributors become the preferred gateway for Asian electronics. Think about the competitive implications. American electronics. Retailers must now compete with Canadian companies that have preferential access to Malaysian suppliers. Canadian tech companies source components more cheaply and reliably than their American competitors. Canadian manufacturers benefit from supply chain stability, while American factories face component shortages and price volatility. The palm oil component of the deal adds another layer of Canadian advantage. Malaysia produces roughly 39% of global palm oil, an essential ingredient in everything from food products to cosmetics. Canada's trade agreement secures preferential access to Malaysian palm oil, while American food manufacturers face higher costs and supply uncertainties. Malaysian Trade Minister described the Canadian partnership as exactly what modern trade relationships should look like. A pointed contrast to the uncertainty and hostility Malaysian exporters experience when dealing with American policies. Malaysian electronics executives privately describe Relief as having a reliable North American partner who doesn't change the rules every election cycle. The network effects extend beyond direct trade. Malaysian companies included in the Canadian deal are establishing research and development facilities in Canada, creating innovation partnerships that once would have located in Silicon Valley or other. Agreement secures preferential access to Thai agricultural products. While American food importers face penalty pricing that makes Thai products uncompetitive compared to Canadian alternatives. But here's where Thailand's pivot reveals Canada's broader continental strategy. Canadian manufacturers gain access to high production expertise in electronics, automotive components, and precision manufacturing. Thai investment in Canadian facilities creates integrated supply chains that serve North American markets without requiring American participation. Canadian retailers secure reliable access to Thai consumer products, while American competitors struggle with supply chain uncertainties and penalty pricing. Thai Manufacturing Association executives describe the Canadian partnership as the future of stable international trade, pointed contrast to the volatility and hostility that characterizes American trade relationships. Thai companies included in the Canadian deal are establishing regional headquarters in Canada, creating innovation. Partnerships that once would have located in American industrial centers. The network effects extend beyond immediate trade benefits. Thai companies investing in Canadian operations gain access to NAFTA, successor agreement benefits that allow them to serve American markets through Canadian subsidiaries, essentially using Canada as a tariff-free gateway to reach American consumers who still want. They produce but whose government has made direct trade relationships economically impossible. But then the human cost becomes obvious for American communities that depended on Thai imports for affordable manufactured goods. Electronics manufacturing workers in America watch Canadian competitors gain cost advantages they can't match. American automotive companies struggle to source components as Thai suppliers prioritize Canadian customers who offer predictable, profitable relationships. American consumers pay higher prices for consumer electronics as supply chains reorganize around Canadian rather than American distribution networks. Thai rice exporters who once filled American grocery store shelves now prioritize Canadian distributors who serve both Canadian and cross-border American markets, often at premium prices that reflect America's self-imposed trade barriers. American restaurants and food manufacturers face ingredient cost increases as Thai agricultural exporters redirect capacity toward more profitable Canadian partnerships. The mathematics are unforgiving for American businesses. Every Thai manufacturer that switches from American to Canadian customers represents lost economic opportunity, reduced competitiveness, and higher costs that American companies may never recover. Because when you penalize your supplier's success, they find customers who appreciate their value. Canadian Trade Minister described the Thai agreement as securing supply chain resilience for the modern economy. Supply chain resilience that deliberately excludes American participation and assumes American trade policies are too volatile to merit long-term business planning. Thailand's message to other Southeast Asian exporters couldn't be clearer. Canada offers what America no longer provides: partnership instead of penalties, mathematics that work instead of, tariffs that don't, and business relationships that survive. Political changes. And here's where it gets dangerous. Critical minerals are leaving too. Number 2, South Africa. The automotive betrayal. South African automotive plants that once proudly displayed Made for America banners, no Showcase Canada partnership logos as part of a $800 million manufacturing and mining deal that fundamentally struck how North America sources automotive components and precious minerals. The betrayal cuts deep because South African manufacturers didn't choose to abandon American partnerships. American tariffs made the choice for them. A 30% penalty on South African automotive parts transformed profitable relationships into financial disaster. But while American tariffs created impossible business mathematics, Canadian trade negotiators created arrestable partnership opportunities. South African automotive manufacturers in Johannesburg and Cape Town faced brutal reality: car parts that cost American automakers $100 last year now cost $130. In an industry where margins are measured in single digits, that's not a price increase, it's a relationship termination notice. But Canadian automotive companies stepped into Thegab with long-term supply agreements that offered South African manufacturers what American customers couldn't: predictable profitability. The Canadian deal includes investment in South African manufacturing facilities specifically designed to serve North American automotive markets through Canadian rather than American supply chains. South African manufacturers gained guaranteed access to Canadian automakers while developing production capacity that can serve American consumers through Canadian subsidiaries, essentially using Canada as a tariff-free gateway to markets that American trade policies have made directly inaccessible. But automotive components represent just the beginning of South Africa's pivot toward Canadian partnerships. The mining component of the deal should terrify American technology companies. South Africa poses some of the world's largest reserves of platinum, palladium, and other precious metals essential for electronics manufacturing, automotive catalytic converters, and renewable energy systems. Canada's trade agreement secures preferential access to South African mining output, while American manufacturers face penalty pricing and supply uncertainties. Think about the strategic implications for American industrial competitiveness. South African platinum that once powered American catalytic converter production now flows primarily to Canadian refineries that serve continental markets. South African palladium that American electronics manufacturers relied on for component production now serves Canadian technology companies that gain cost advantages over their American competitors. South African Trade Minister described the Canadian partnership as exactly what modern trade relationships should accomplish: mutual benefit without political interference. South African manufacturing executives privately expressed relief at having a North American partner who treats business as business rather than political theater. The agricultural component adds another layer of Canadian advantage. South Africa exports wine, citrus fruits, and specialty foods that American consumers value for quality and affordability. Canada's trade agreement secures preferential access to South African agricultural products, while American food importers struggle with penalty pricing that makes South African products uncompetitive. But then the network effects reveal how quickly entire industries can reorganize around non-American partnerships. Canadian automotive companies gain access to South African manufacturing registers and supply chain reliability that American competitors can no longer access affordably. South African invest in Canadian facilities creates integrated production networks that serve North American markets without requiring American participation. Canadian mining companies develop partnerships with South African operations that secure critical mineral supplies for Canadian, rather than American industrial needs. The human cost hits American automotive workers and consumers directly. American auto manufacturers face component cost increases that make their products less competitive compared to Canadian alternatives. American electrics companies struggle to source precious metals as South African suppliers prioritize Canadian customers who offer better terms and more reliable relationships. South African wine and citrus exports that once filled American grocery stores now flow primarily to Canadian distributors who serve both Canadian and cross-border American markets, often at premium prices that reflect America's self-imposed trade barriers. American resorts and specialty food retailers face inventory challenges as South African agricultural exporters redirect capacity toward more profitable Canadian partnerships. The mathematics are devastating for American manufacturing geometry. Every South African supplier that switches from American to Canadian customers represents lost cost advantages, reduced supply chain reliability, and higher production costs that American companies may never recover. Canadian Industrial Minister announced the South African deal as securing Canada's position in global supply chains, a position that deliberately excludes American participation in DOSMs. American trade policies are too volatile to merit long-term industrial planning. South Africa's message to other resource-rich developing countries couldn't be clearer. Canada offers partnership and profitability, where America offers penalties and political interference. Finally, the precision that once powered America's industries has a new home. Number 1. Switzerland. The precision exodus. The Swiss precision that once powered American manufacturing excellence now serves Canadian industry exclusively. Thanks to a $1.3 billion technology and luxury goods deal that represents perhaps the most devastating blow to American industrial competitiveness in modern trade history. A 39% tariff on Swiss goods doesn't just affect numbers on a balance sheet. It dismantles relationships built over generations and redirects some of the world's most advanced manufacturing technology away from American factories and toward Canadian facilities that welcome Swiss excellence instead of penalizing it. Swiss watchmakers, it's names that define luxury and precision worldwide, faced impossible arithmetic when American tariffs added $3,900 to a $10,000 timepiece, but rather than absorb losses or abandon North American markets. Swiss luxury manufacturers found a solution that American retailers' exclusive distribution agreements with Canadian partners who serve both Canadian and cross-border American markets at premium prices. The machinery sector tells an even more devastating story for American manufacturing competitiveness. Swiss precision equipment. The Toolstadt American factories relied on to manufacture everything from medical devices to aerospace components now costs nearly 40% more for American buyers. But Canadian manufacturers assure the same equipment at competitive prices through partnership agreements that treat Swiss precision as an asset than a liability. Canada's bilateral agreement with Switzerland includes technology transfer partnerships that bring Swiss manufacturing expertise directly to Canadian facilities. Swiss investment in Canadian precision manufacturing creates production capabilities that serve North American markets without requiring American participation. Canadian manufacturers gain access to Swiss innovation, while American competitors watch their cost advantages disappear. But here's where Switzerland's pivot reveals the most sophisticated aspect of Canada's trade strategy. Swiss financial services, banking technology, and precision manufacturing expertise don't just serve Canadian companies. They create Canadian advantages that American businesses can't match. Swiss banks establishing Canadian operations provide trade financing that supports Canadian rather than American international commerce. Swiss technology companies choosing Canadian partnerships over American alternatives. Create innovation networks. Exclude American participation. The luxury goods component of the deal, but should worry American retailers hoe-built business models around Swiss brand exclusivity. Swiss watches, precision instruments, and luxury products now flow primarily through Canadian distribution networks that contralex to North American markets. American retailers face reduced inventory access and higher wholesale costs, while Canadian competitors secure exclusive relationships with Swiss luxury brands. Swiss Precision Manufacturing Association described the Swiss-Canadian partnership as the future of stable technology, transfer appointed rejection of American trade relationships that treat Swiss excellence as a target for panel tire than partnership. Swiss executives privately describe relief at finding a North American partner who understands that precision manufacturing requires predictable relations. The pharmaceutical and medical device implications extend beyond immediate trade benefits.